Hey guys, welcome to part 5 in the series of the 8 basic concepts of the hammer throw. Today we're going to do the orbit. If you haven't checked out the other 4 videos, please check those out. Luckily, this video will be very, very short because there's not really much to it, really. So I will say that this is probably one of the only concepts that translate the shot and disc, because the orbit is universal through hammer, shot, disc. I guess jab technically has an orbit, but not like the same way. But yeah, so it translates the basic concepts, what affects the orbit, what the orbit should be, where the orbit is. Those are the same no matter what. Those are just basic. It doesn't really change. But we'll go through it anyway. I've actually made a video about the orbit for discus, and that applies to shot put, and it applies to hammer, but I'll do one specifically for hammer because there are a little bit of differences, just because, it's not a shot put or discus. You're facing a different way out the back. It's totally, it's not totally different, but there are some things that can affect it, that maybe it is hard to do in shot and disc. So we'll get into that. So, first of all, what is an orbit? So, if you guys have thrown shot or disc, you guys can just ignore this part because I'm sure you guys know what an orbit is. The orbit is basically the path that the hammer will travel through the ring. So, if you've ever seen a video of someone throw a hammer, you know it's not like just flat the entire way. They have it goes low and then high and then low and then high. All right, that's basically what the orbit is in layman's terms. It's just the path of the implement. All right, so how to achieve an orbit? So first of all, in hammer, it all starts with the wind. All right. Well, actually, first let's first actually get out of the way where the orbit should be, because that's the same in shot and disc. So I'm going to be speaking as a right-handed thrower. So for lefties, it will just be the opposite. All right. So the low point. All right. The low point, you'll put it in, and it will be somewhere. For lefties and righties, hopefully it will be just a little bit where your belly button is. So like your center line. All right. For a right-handed thrower, it will be a little bit on your right side, maybe. And then for lefties, it will be a little bit on your left side. So for right-handed throwers, you do not ever want the low point to ever be on your left side ever. All right? Because that means your orbit is going to be completely off. It's going to make the entire throw difficult. Your release angle is going to be really weird. You're going to start doing a whole bunch of weird stuff. All right? And I'm speaking from personal experience. All right? You always want it either on your right in line with your right knee or in line with the belly button. I would say just like in between here. You don't want the low point too far this way, because that means you're dragging the hammer and you're not actually pushing it, and now you're throwing it instead of the hammer throwing you. All right? But we're going to get into that. But basically, summarize, low point for right-handed throwers, a little bit with the right knee or the belly button, just like right in here. All right, the high point. So the low point's here. Where does the high point go? Somewhere here. So if this is like my sector right here, all right, you want the high point to be somewhere around here if you're a right-handed thrower. For lefties, it would be somewhere here. So somewhere around the right sector. All right, so I put it in here, and I'm here. All right, and I'm just going this low and this high just for example. All right, here, and then you put it in again. Should be here and here. All right, what you don't want, so if I put it on my left side, so if my orbit is here, my low point is here, look at where my high point is. Right over there. Where did I start turning? That way, down the left. You never want to go down the left, ever. All right? And now, the chances of you throwing into the cage are a lot. The chances of you sectoring are a lot. And the chances of you having a bad throw, pretty much guaranteed. All right? So, and also, you have to establish this orbit on your winds. So you can't be winding on your left side and then expect to just put it in correctly. When you have the orbit, you want the low point here, the high point here, low point here, high point here. So then you can just go nice and easy. If you're winding and you go here, you're just going to turn there. All right? So, that's very important to establish a good orbit on your winds, not at your first turn. Your winds. Your winds will dictate your orbit and how the throw will go. Now, the beauty about hammer is that if you screw up one turn, you have a couple others maybe to salvage it, but it's not going to be your best throw ever. All right? You want to try and not have to do that and try and just make your start the best you possibly can. All right? And that starts with your winds. All right, so basically, that's where your low and high point should be. Now, some things that can affect it. So, just like shot and disc, probably the biggest thing I see people do that affect their orbit is, so like even if they're winding on their right side, the biggest thing that people do, they pull immediately. And look at where I pull my left shoulder. Look at where my low point is. I'm here. Instead of staying nice and relaxed and just sitting against it, now my orbit's in the right place. All right, so that's the number one orbit killer. And just throw killer is just pulling straight at the back. It's like a discus, it'd be like here, and my orbit's completely in the wrong way. All right? So it's the same kind of concept. So these concepts translate. What affects the orbit in shot and disc usually affect it in hammer, all right? Because, it's just like discus. You want orbit to be here, 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 here. All right, it's the same kind of thing in hammer and shot put. All right, so that's probably the biggest one that I see, especially with beginners, is pulling. And you can have a good orbit on your one, on your two, pull on three, now my orbit's screwed up. All right, you have to stay nice and relaxed. All right, and just let the hammer wants to follow a natural orbit. The worst thing you can do is try and do weird stuff with your upper body to try and pull it out. Just honestly, you just wind, and then just melt into the throw. All right, just melt, sit against it, let the hammer do all the work. All right, so the biggest thing you can do to help an orbit is just let the hammer do what it wants to do. All right, it wants to move. All right, it wants to have a good orbit. All right, let it have a good orbit. All right, that's a hard thing for beginners. And this is going to be my next video about how the length, because that's a big part of hammer, just like in discus, is the length or how far the implement is away from you. But just a little teaser. Basically, you're here. The second you go like this and pull in, or pull with your shoulder like that, basically doing anything to screw up what the hammer wants to do, is going to be a distance killer, and it's just going to make your life really miserable and really hard. All right? For no reason. Make the throw easy. All right? Let the hammer do what it wants, and all you have to do is just make sure the hammer doesn't pull you forward. All right? So, basically, that's the number one thing I see is that affects the orbit in hammer, and just about everything is pulling. All right? Number two is, in conjunction with that, not staying relaxed. All right, so when you're not relaxed, you're going to tend to pull. You're going to tend to try and arm the hammer and try and do a bicep curl and just go like that. So that goes into conjunction, but in basically having tense shoulders like this instead of just being nice and long and relaxed. All right. So that's number 2, is just not being relaxed. Number 3 is when you're winding, you're just not putting it in the right place. You can be relaxed and do all that, but if you're not actually like winding correctly, or you're just not like putting it in the right place on your first turn, you know, you can be as relaxed as can be, but you still have to actually put it in the right place. So I would say is like the third. 4 is basically yeah. Oh, sorry, I was just thinking in my head. Let's just leave it at those 3, because I could just do a whole video on things that can affect an orbit. I guess that's kind of what this is, but I don't want to make this a 30-minute video. So basically, you shouldn't really have to think about it very much. As long as you're just staying nice and relaxed, you just put it in on the entry where it should be, and just not pull. All right, again, easier said than done, but not pull and not try and like do weird stuff and with your upper body and whatnot. The orbit should just come naturally. It's just like discus. You know, you just wind back, let the hips do all the work, and you just try not do a bunch of stupid stuff with your upper body, and you should be just fine. The orbit will just naturally work. All right, so that's the biggest thing I'll say about it. So yeah. Oh, I actually totally forgot. Sorry. Why is an orbit actually important? Well, one, and probably the biggest reason, is it makes the throw easier. It's really hard to throw a hammer just completely flat like this. It's just going to come out just like a laser beam. So you want the low point and the high point, because when you go to release, it's at its high point, low point, high point. All right? It's very hard if you don't have an orbit to go here and then just try and just arm it up. All right? So we're going to get to release in a totally different video. But basically, the orbit is important because it sets up your angle of release. It makes the throw easier. It makes the throw more rhythmical. It makes the throw more athletic. And it just makes everything just way easier than trying to hold it flat. That's a really hard thing to do, because the hammer naturally wants to go to a low and high point when you're turning. All right? So biggest advice I can give, let it have an orbit. Don't try and hold it down or up. Don't try and hold it flat. Let it have an orbit. All right, just relax. Let it happen. It's very hard, especially for beginners, to try not to, not to arm it and stuff, because it's a natural instinct when something's trying to pull you forward to try and pull back. But just like in the last video, that's the worst thing you can do. You want to just sit back while keeping the hammer long. All right, and once you figure out how to do that, you're going to start throwing way further. The throw is going to be a lot easier, and your left shoulder isn't going to hurt. All right, so hopefully that helps. Thanks all for watching. There'll be another video next week about the length of the hammer and why that's important. And yeah, hope you guys learned something, and see y'all later.